All right, we're going to be talking about reading a tape measure today. Now, when we talk about reading a tape measure, we typically see something like this where it's broken down into segments. And this is a segment of 0 to 1 inch. And typically, how many ticks or notches do we see between 0 and 1 inch, or maybe 2 and 3 inches, or 10 and 11 inches? And the answer to that is typically 16. Now, we do need to be careful when we're looking at this to make sure we're in the right scale. So how do we verify that we're in the right scale of 16 ticks versus 8 ticks versus 4 ticks? So we can simply count over and find out how many ticks are between our inch marks. So as we're counting over, we should end up with a number of 4, 8, 16, something like that. So today we have 16. So this particular tape measure has 16, which is the common marking between 0 and 1 inch, or between 2 and 3 inches. So here's a different tape measure, and this tape measure actually has 30-second marks. So that means if we were to count over each one of these ticks, we would count 32 between 1 inch and 2 inch, or 2 inch and 3 inch. Now, those tape measures that typically have the 30-second marks, that usually only last for about the first foot, or 12 inches. And you can see here on the left side of this tape measure, you can see the 30-second marks. And on the right side of the tape measure, you can see the 16th marks. And so if you have a tape measure that has a 30-second marks and you don't like reading that, you could always pull your tape measure out to the 12 and start taking your measurements off of that 12 mark. If you have something small that you're measuring and you don't want to measure those 30 seconds, you could burn or spend 12 inches and start measuring at the 12. So again, that has to relate to the scale that we're using. You got to know if you're in 30 seconds or if you're in 16ths. And this is an example of a different scale yet. This one here, if we count over, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this particular scale on this square is in eighths. Each one of these ticks is 1/8 of an inch. So what if we want to count by eighths on a regular tape measure? How could we do that? Well, we would count by twos. And so that means every 2 marks would be an eighth. So there would be 1/8, 2/8, 1, 2, 3/8, 1, 2, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and 8/8. And of course, anything over itself in a fraction form is a whole number, and that's where we get the 1 inch mark. Okay, so that would be measuring in eighths, would be every 2 marks, or counting every two ticks. Now, what if we want to count by fourths or quarters of an inch? Well, that's going to be counting by 4. So we can do the same thing we just did and count by 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's going to be 1/4 of an inch. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is 2 quarters. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is 3 quarters. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 quarters. Okay, and those are a little easier to identify on the tape measure because they typically have the longer marks, right? The 1/4 inch is longer than the eighth marks. The eighth is longer than the 16th mark. So you can visually see those quarters, or you could count by 4s to get your quarter marks. What if we want to count by halves? Again, the same thing. We could count by eighths this time, and we would get our halves. So 1, 6, 7, 8. That is 1/2. 1, 2, 3, 5. 2 halves. Okay, so 1/2 and 2 halves. And we can see that those half marks are even longer now than those 1/4 inch marks. So we really shouldn't have to count for the halves because they are typically identified by the second longest mark on the tape measure. The first longest being the whole numbers, then the halfway marks, then the quarter marks, then the eighth marks, and then the 16th marks. All right, so what size is indicated? Well, we can do a couple things. If you don't know your measurements very well, I would recommend counting over. So let's simply count over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 markings in. Now 6 would be our top number. Then how do we know how many to put it over? Well, we've already counted this scale once and we ended up with 16. So we would have 6 over 16. Now we're not done. We need to reduce this. And how do we reduce our fraction? Well, we simply need to ask ourselves about the top number to begin with. Now we look at the top number, and if the top number is even on the tape measure sizes, then generally it is reducible. So also another way to do this is to ask yourself, can 6 be divided by 2? If it can, then do the math. 6 divided by 2 would be 3, right? And so what we do to the top, we also need to do to the bottom. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now 16 divided by 2 is going to give us 8. So 3/8. Now, if we take a look at that top number, we'll notice that it's an odd number. An odd number, when it comes to reading a tape measure, means that it cannot be reduced. If the top number is odd, it cannot be reduced any further. All right, let's take a look at another one. What about this marking here? Well, what size is indicated? We can count over to figure out how many down the tape measure it is. And we come up with 13, and that's going to be our top number. And what is our bottom number? Okay, we know the scale we're working in, and it's 16. There's 16 total marks. So we are using 13 of those marks out of the total 16. So if we look at our number here, we now need to ask ourselves, can it be reduced? Well, the top number is odd, okay? Most likely, in the tape measure cases, an odd number cannot be reduced. All right, so we're looking at the top number specifically for this fraction. And we're going to ask ourselves, can it be divided by 2? 13 divided by 2, will we get a whole number? We don't want a fraction or a decimal in this. So 13 divided by 2 is going to give us not a whole number. So no, this will not work. That means that 13/16 is our final number or our final answer. All right, as we look at this one here, we're starting to see an actual tape measure. Now with this actual tape measure, we've moved on from the 0 to 1 inch. Now we're working in bigger inches. So the first thing we need to do is identify the whole number that we're working in. So we're going to be in 27 inches. So if I'm working in 27 inches, I'm going to jot that down because we're going to need that. Now we need to know how far over in the fraction form we are from 27. So let's count over. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we are 4 over how many typical spots in 1 inch? Right? It was 16. So 4 over 16. Now we're going to take and look to see if this fraction can be reduced. And again, we're going to look at that top number. And if that top number is even, it is going to be able to be reduced. So 4 divided by 2. 4 divided by 2 is going to give us 2. And then what we do to the top, we need to do to the bottom. So 16 divided by 2. And that is going to give us 8. So 2/8. But wait, that top number yet is still an even number. That means we need to reduce it again. So 2 divided by 2 is going to give us 1 this time. And 8 divided by 2 is going to give us 4. Now, if we look at that top number now, we see that that top number is an odd number. No longer can it be reduced by 2 and get a whole number. So now we're going to rewrite our answer as 27 1/4 of an inch. We need to remember to always reduce our fractions down. All right, let's take a look at another one here. What size is indicated? Well, if we take a look, first thing we want to do is locate that whole number. This time it's 77 inches. So we're going to go ahead and write that down, 77. And now we need to figure out how many ticks over we are, or notches over. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We are 8. And our bottom number of the fraction is going to be 16. If you're unsure, you could continue counting all the way down to the whole number. 16. So 77 8/16. Now, we need to reduce, right? So we're going to first look at that top number and ask ourselves, can 8 be divided by 2? And the answer is yes in this time. So 8 divided by 2, you're going to get the answer of 4. And we're going to do to the bottom what we did to the top. We're going to get 16 divided by 2. And that answer is going to be 8. Now, we're not quite done because that top number again can be divided by 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. And what we do to the top, we do to the bottom. So 8 divided by 2 is going to be 4. We're looking at the top number still. The top number is even, which means it can be divided by 2. So 2 divided by 2 is going to give us 1. So what we do to the top number, we need to do to the bottom number as well. So 4 divided by 2 is going to give us 2. Now, when we look at this number now, we have an odd number on top. An odd number tells us that we need to stop. We're no longer reducing. So an odd number is going to end up being our answer. So our answer is 77 1/2 inches. Now, another way we need to look at is measuring in feet inches. Now, in our class, we're dealing with cabinet making, and typically cabinet making is smaller projects. But there are times when you're building things like a house and you're building long walls, and you need to measure in longer distance than inches because your inches would be so great. So for example, when you build that wall, you measure in feet inches to describe maybe 40 feet 3 inches versus several hundred inches long. So let's first take a look at the tape measure here. And you'll notice on a tape measure that typically every foot is marked uniquely. This particular tape measure is using an arrow to indicate that you're at the foot mark. And it has F behind it to indicate feet. So 2 feet. Now, how do we tell where the 20, down here where the 27 1/4 is, how do we tell how many inches that is? Well, first we have the 2 feet and then 1 inch. And then next we would have 2 feet 2 inches and then 2 feet 3 inches. 2 foot and 3 inch. Now I left room here for the fraction to go after as well. And let's zoom in a little closer so you can take a look at where that fraction is. As we look here, we're at the 3 inch mark, 2 foot 3 inch. And now we're going to count over our fractions. And we get 4. 4 over 16, and then you would reduce, and the answer is 1/4. You can also look at those quarter marks, right? The quarter marks are the third longest. First longest is the full marks. Second longest is the half marks. Third longest is quarter. So we'd have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. So we're at the 1/4 mark. So we know our answer is going to be 2 foot 3 inches and 1/4. So 2 foot 3 1/4 inch. And that could be written how you see it right here on the screen, or maybe you write it with an abbreviation, 2 foot 3 1/4 inch. Either way would be suitable. All right, so that's measuring in feet inches. Let's try one more here. All right, we're measuring in feet inches again. And this time you notice we're further down on the tape measure. We're at 137 inches and however many ticks over. And the first thing we're going to do is locate where we are foot-wise. And so the first thing we're going to do is look for that indicator indicating where our nearest foot is. We are at 11 feet. So we're in the 11-foot range. And then again, if you look across the top, this particular tape measure, and most tape measures do, have it indicated of how many inches beyond that foot we are. You can see they're not as bright or dark colored as the inch marks are. They're usually a different color. That might be actually red in real life on the tape measure, or might be a different color than the numbers below in the inches. But so first we've located our foot mark at 11 feet, and then we're going to simply start counting over, right? 11 foot and then 11 foot 1 inch, 11 foot 2 inches, 11 foot 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches. So 11 foot 5 inches. And then we have some fractions of a tick over here. So let's write this down, 11 foot 5 inch. And I've left room for my fractions. Now let's zoom in a little bit so we can see those fractions a little closer. And here's our 11-foot 5-inch mark, and we're looking to see where that marking is. So we can count over again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just like we did before. And we have 5, and if we were to keep counting over, we would know that we are over 16. So 5 out of 16 parts we're using. So our answer then would be 11-foot 5 and 5/16. Now, again, if we look at that top number of that fraction, it is an odd number. That tells us it cannot be reduced anymore. If it were even, then we would need to try to reduce it. Because it's odd, it's not. We can write it like this with the symbol marks, or we can write it with the abbreviations, 11-foot 5 and 5/16 inch. So if you have any questions on reading the tape measure, whether it's in inches, whether it's in feet inches, please talk to your instructor and they will gladly help you to better understand reading the tape measure so that you can be successful in class.